You ever wake up on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, feeling like nothing can ruin your day? Yeah, me too, until I saw the envelope. It was taped to my door like some mob warning, bright red and impossible to miss. At first, I thought, great, another HOA memo about trash bins or lawn heights. But no, this wasn't a friendly reminder. This was a lawsuit. $75,000. Because of my front door. Let me say that again so it really sinks in 75 grand. Because my front door was painted peacock blue. Apparently, that color was a direct violation of community aesthetics, which is HOA speak for we hate fun. So, naturally, I did what any rational person would do. I marched straight down to the HOA president's house. Marcy. Yes, her name was Marcy. Of course, it was. Marcy's house looked like the kind of place you'd see on a movie set for a Stepford Wives sequel. Perfectly trimmed hedges, American flag waving in the breeze, and a driveway that probably had its own Instagram account. I rang the doorbell and waited, rehearsing my opening line. Something polite but firm, like, "Are you out of your mind?" When she opened the door, I immediately understood why she was in charge. She had this clipboard and blazer energy that screamed, "I thrive on passive-aggressive emails." "Good morning, Marcy," I said, forcing a smile. "I got this notice on my door, and I just wanted to clarify. Did you seriously sue me because of the color of my door?" Marcy's smile was so fake it deserved its own Oscar. "Oh, it's nothing personal, dear. The HOA rules are very clear about approved exterior colors. And, well, peacock blue isn't one of them." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "So, you're telling me," I said, my voice dripping with disbelief, "that I'm being sued because my door doesn't match your beige fantasy?" "It's not my fantasy," she corrected, holding up her clipboard like it was the Bible. "It's the community's vision. We're all about harmony here." "Harmony?" I laughed. "Marcy, half the houses on this street look like they were designed by someone who thinks eggshell is a personality. I'm adding color, not committing a crime." Her smile tightened. "The rules are the rules. If we let you break them, what's next? Neon pink shutters? Polka-dotted fences? Chaos?" "Oh yes, Marcy," I said, deadpan. "Because peacock blue is the gateway drg to anarchy." Marcy, being the benevolent dictator she is, invited me to plead my case at the next HOA meeting. So there I was, in a room full of people who looked like they spent their weekends alphabetizing their spice racks. Marcy called the meeting to order with the kind of self-importance you'd expect from someone who takes HOA bylaws more seriously than the Constitution. "Before we begin," she said, looking directly at me, "I'd like to remind everyone that this is a civil discussion. Let's keep things respectful." I raised my hand. "Does that rule apply to suing your neighbors for $75,000? Or is that exempt?" There were a few snickers from the crowd, but Marcy shot me a look that could curdle milk. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice oozing condescension, "why don't you explain why you chose to violate the community guidelines?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Sure, Marcy. I picked the color because it makes me happy. It's bold, it's cheerful, and it doesn't look like every other front door on this block. I didn't realize happiness was against the rules." "It's not about happiness," she said, clutching her clipboard like it was a lifeline. "It's about maintaining property values." "Really? Because I'm pretty sure my house didn't lose value the second I added some personality to it." Marcy turned to the crowd, clearly trying to rally her troops. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have guidelines for a reason. Without them, this neighborhood would fall apart." One of the neighbors, a guy named Bill who I vaguely recognized as the guy who never picks up after his dog, raised his hand. "I don't mind the door," he said. "It's better than those inflatable Christmas decorations you put up last year." I almost laughed out loud. Marcy's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "This isn't about Christmas decorations, Bill," she snapped. "It's about principle." "Oh, I agree," I said, grinning. "Principle is important. Like the principle of not being a petty tyrant." After the HOA meeting, I knew Marcy wasn't going to back down. The woman had the determination of a bloodhound and the soul of a tax auditor. But if she thought I'd roll over and repaint my door beige, she was in for a rude awakening. The very next day, I received another letter from the HOA. It was typed in all caps, because nothing says professionalism like yelling in font form, and demanded that I cease and desist my blatant disregard for their design harmony. They even threw in a little threat about additional fines. Cute. Naturally, I decided to respond in my own way, by painting my mailbox the same shade of peacock blue. 2 days later, I was out front, admiring my colorful rebellion, when I spotted Marcy marching up the sidewalk. She was flanked by her 2 lackeys, Doris and Linda, who I swear only existed to nod at everything she said. Together, they looked like a suburban version of the mean girls, minus the charisma. "Good morning, Marcy," I called, waving brightly. "What brings you to my humble, offensively colorful abode?" She didn't smile. Shocker. "Mr. Turner," she said, stopping a few feet away like she didn't want to risk catching my rebellious attitude. "We need to talk about your recent actions." "Oh, you mean my mailbox?" I asked innocently. "Isn't it beautiful?" I figured if the door caused so much excitement, why not spread the joy? Marcy's eye twitched. "This isn't a joke. You're deliberately provoking the HOA." "Provoking?" I gasped, clutching my chest. "Marcy, no. I'm expressing myself. Isn't that what America's all about?" Doris piped up, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's not about expression. It's about maintaining standards." "Exactly," Linda chimed in. "We can't have people just doing whatever they want." "Oh, the horror," I said, nodding solemnly. "Next thing you know, someone might plant daisies in their yard without prior approval." Marcy crossed her arms, clearly done with the sarcasm. "Mr. Turner, if you don't repaint your door and mailbox by the end of the week, the HOA will impose additional fines." I tilted my head. "Out of curiosity, Marcy, where does all this fine money go? Is there a slush fund for new clipboards? Or do you just pocket it?" Her face turned redder than a stop sign. "That's not your concern. This is your final warning." By now, it was obvious Marcy wasn't going to quit until I bent to her will. Unfortunately for her, I had no intention of bending. Instead, I decided it was time to lawyer up. Enter my cousin, Sophie. She's a real estate attorney who once got a landlord to pay her clients' moving expenses because the building's paint was too depressing. She was perfect for this. I called her that afternoon, giving her the full rundown. She listened patiently, then let out a low whistle. 75 grand over a door color? That's a new one. Are they serious? As a heart attack, I said. And now they're threatening more fines. Well, Sophie said, the good news is, HOA rules don't trump state law. If their guidelines are vague or arbitrary, you've got a strong case. Send me everything they've sent you, and I'll start digging. A week later, I had a plan. Sophie discovered that the HOA's color restrictions weren't as airtight as Marcy liked to pretend. The bylaws included a list of approved colors, but it hadn't been updated in 15 years. Even better, there was no mention of penalties for violating the rules, just a vague line about appropriate actions. Armed with this information, I sent Marcy a little letter of my own. It was beautifully typed on official-looking letterhead and included phrases like potential legal action and abuse of power. Sophie helped me craft it, but I added my own flair. For example, while I understand your deep commitment to mediocrity, I must respectfully decline to comply with arbitrary demands. Your attempt to enforce outdated guidelines is not only unreasonable, but may also constitute harassment. Should you continue to pursue this matter, I am fully prepared to defend my rights in court and seek damages for emotional distress caused by your relentless beige agenda. I dropped it off at Marcy's house personally, because if she was going to try to intimidate me, she deserved to see my smirk when I handed her the envelope. The next HOA meeting was even more entertaining than the last. Word had gotten out about my letter, and half the neighborhood showed up to see the fireworks. Marcy was already fuming when I arrived. She tried to start the meeting as usual, but one of my neighbors, Mrs. Ramirez, interrupted. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to know why the HOA is wasting our money suing someone over a door color." There were murmurs of agreement. Marcy glared at her. "This isn't a waste. It's about protecting the community. Protecting us from what? Mrs. Ramirez shot back. A cheerful front door? I leaned over to Bill, who was sitting next to me. I think I'm in love with her, I whispered. Marcy tried to regain control, but it was clear she was losing the room. People started chiming in, questioning why the HOA was so obsessed with trivial issues. Someone even brought up Marcy's own violations, like the fact that her garden gnomes weren't on the approved decoration list. Let's not get off topic, Marcy snapped, her voice shaking. This is about Mr. Turner's refusal to follow the rules. I stood up. Actually, Marcy, it's about your refusal to admit you're wrong. The bylaws are outdated, the fines are arbitrary, and this lawsuit is a waste of everyone's time and money. There was a smattering of applause. Marcy looked like she wanted to throw her clipboard at me, but instead, she adjourned the meeting abruptly and stormed out. After the meeting, it became clear that Marcy was losing her iron grip on the neighborhood. The mood on the street shifted. People who used to avoid eye contact with me were now stopping to chat. Turns out, a lot of my neighbors weren't exactly thrilled with the HOA's dictatorship either. They just didn't have the energy to fight back. I became a kind of unofficial spokesperson for the anti-HOA rebellion. People started sharing stories. Ridiculous fines for parking too close to their own driveways, nasty letters about garden weeds that were barely visible, and, my personal favorite, someone being threatened for hanging a bird feeder too low. A week later, I hosted a little gathering at my house. Nothing formal, just some coffee and snacks for the neighbors who wanted to vent about Marcy's reign of terror. Mrs. Ramirez was the first to show up. I brought tamales, she said, handing me a container. Figured we'd need some fuel for this revolution. Next came Bill, the dog guy. He brought his beagle, Max, who promptly tried to pee on my Peacock Blue mailbox. He's showing his support, Bill joked. By the time everyone arrived, we had a solid group of about 10 people. We sat in my living room, swapping horror stories and brainstorming ways to push back. Sophie joined via video call, sipping a coffee and grinning like she was watching a reality show. All right, Sophie said, here's the deal. HOAs only have as much power as you let them. If enough of you band together, you can challenge their decisions, or even replace the board entirely. Replace them? Mrs. Ramirez said, eyes gleaming. You mean we could kick Marcy out? Exactly, Sophie said. It's called a recall election. You just need enough signatures from homeowners to trigger a vote. The room buzzed with excitement. Bill raised his hand like we were in school. What happens if she refuses to step down? Sophie grinned. She doesn't get a choice. That's democracy, baby. Over the next 2 weeks, we went into full campaign mode. Mrs. Ramirez spearheaded the petition drive, going door to door with a clipboard and a fiery speech about reclaiming the neighborhood. Bill and I teamed up to make flyers, which I printed on neon paper just to piss off Marcy. We even started a group chat called the Anti-Marcy Coalition. It was mostly memes about HOA rules, but it kept morale high. Of course, Marcy didn't take this lying down. She started sending out frantic letters, warning homeowners that a recall election would destabilize the community. She even held an emergency meeting to try to rally her supporters. It didn't go well. I wasn't planning to attend the emergency meeting, but when Mrs. Ramirez texted me that Marcy was losing it, I couldn't resist. When I walked into the clubhouse, Marcy was pacing like a caged animal. Her usual calm, condescending demeanor had been replaced with barely contained panic. This petition is reckless, she shouted, waving a piece of paper like it was evidence in a crime drama. These people don't understand how much work goes into maintaining our standards. Mrs. Ramirez stood up. Oh, we understand, Marcy. We just don't agree that your standards should cost us thousands of dollars in fines and lawsuits. Marcy ignored her and turned to the crowd. If this recall succeeds, the neighborhood will fall into chaos. Property values will plummet. Do you really want to live in a community where anything goes? I raised my hand. Define chaos, Marcy. Are we talking Burning Man levels or just like colorful front doors? The room erupted in laughter. Marcy's face turned crimson. This isn't a joke, Mr. Turner. You're destroying everything we've built. Oh, You mean your empire of arbitrary rules and overpriced fines? I shot back. Yeah, sorry about that. When the day of the recall vote arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Marcy had pulled out all the stops, sending out glossy mailers warning of an uncertain future if she were removed. I countered with a simple message. Vote yes if you're tired of living in a beige dictatorship. The turnout was higher than anyone expected. Neighbors who hadn't attended a single HOA meeting in years showed up to cast their vote. Marcy stood by the ballot box, her clipboard clutched like a security blanket, watching every vote like she could will them to go her way. It took less than an hour to count the ballots, but it felt like an eternity. When the results were finally announced, the room erupted in cheers. 67% voted to remove Marcy and her cronies from the board. Watching Marcy pack up her clipboard and leave the clubhouse was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. She didn't say a word as she walked out, but the look on her face said it all. She'd been defeated, and she knew it. The new board, led by Mrs. Ramirez, wasted no time overturning some of the most ridiculous rules. Fines were reduced, the color restrictions were loosened, and they even approved my Peacock Blue door as an official inspiration for future designs. As for Marcy, she pretty much disappeared after the vote. Rumor has it, she tried to start a new HOA in another neighborhood, but I'm guessing they weren't ready for her clipboard crusade. If there's one thing I learned from this whole mess, it's that standing up to bullies is worth every ounce of stress. My front door still shines brightly, a symbol of rebellion and victory, and if anyone ever tries to mess with it again, well, let's just say I've got Sophie on speed dial.